When I'm choosing the watch I want to wear for the day, I take a moment to reflect on the collection in front of me, to appreciate the reasons I have each watch. Deep collectors often pursue specific watches in a manner that reflects a personal journey. And discovering that journey, that path through the watch world, where all things mechanical meet the stories of real people, that is the core of Watches in the Wild. In the final chapter for our road through America, we're focusing on that specific and special love of collecting. We're heading north out of Los Angeles on the PCH, that's the Pacific Coast Highway, to meet up with some fellow watch enthusiasts to have an adventure, talk watches, and of course, enjoy the view.
You know, James, this is one of our nation's greatest driving roads ever, the Pacific Coast Highway.
I was pretty impressed by it.
You may have heard of it.
I have, yeah, for
and
sure.
what do you think? As a first-timer PCHer, what do you make?
Yeah, I mean, hey, I love the ocean a lot. I love a good drive. Looked like lots of spots to kind of pull off and take a peek, a few photos.
It's true. And now we're here.
It's a pretty remarkable piece of road. Sometimes roads don't really live up to their reputations.
It's true.
This one's just kind of like one insane view after another. There's lots of, turnouts. You can come in, take a picture, take a little break. It's something to be proud of, for sure.
But I will say, I'm not rushing up the coast. I think it's important to take a moment and enjoy the view.
Absolutely.
Cut. All right, let's go.
So I got this Bulova, which again is kind of like my vibe for LA, the gold watch thing. Maybe I leaned into it a little hard. You're rocking a Tudor.
I am.
The BB58, the kind of original run. What else did you bring with you on the trip?
Well, a Grand Seiko diver, a Seiko chronograph, a Hamilton khaki field. I tried to kind of cover the spread of what we were doing. So
what's up with the GS diver?
All right, GS diver, interesting watch. So it's obviously a high beat movement.
Yeah.
It's an SKX dialed up to an 11.
Yeah.
And the coolest thing about it, something that I really like, is the blurple dial.
Right.
Blurple is a combination between blue and purple.
Okay. I think I could have gotten there without the explanation, but I get you.
You know, what other watch has a blurple dial? Can you name one?
I mean, that SSK 003 in person has a lot of purpley tones.
Does it now?
It's not purple.
Yeah.
Or blurple.
All right.
But it's like blue blurple. When you write about dive watches, or if you're Cole Pennington, chances are you'll have some dive experiences at some point. And being on the coast, we had to take the opportunity to take our dive watches on a proper dive. Back in June of 22, we published a profile on Asha Wagner. She's a fire captain, hazardous materials training officer, hazmat specialist, and adventurous watch collector. Needless to say, she's pretty tough on her watches, and her collection shows a direct connection to the realities of her active lifestyle.
35 to 55 feet depth of water. Inside the kelp, it's going to be like you're swimming through the trees, which is a really cool experience. I highly recommend you take a look up and see how the sunlight filters through the kelp. It's one of the awesome parts of California diving.
After sharing a local dive, Asha brought some of her watches to the beach to give us a closer look.
Initially, I was not into watches at all. I was actually kind of anti-watches because of, the different activities that I had in my life.
Sure.
And so it wasn't really until I started the promotional process to captain that I started to become interested in watches. I had to have a watch on my wrist to accurately record our actions during a call.
Okay.
And so that led me to research different tool watches, and I found out more about the historical uses of watches as tools. And then I became very interested in them and started collecting from there.
And then today, you're out on a job, you're working. What's on your wrist? What do you like to wear when you're on the clock?
More often than not, the two watches that I wear will be my triple aught design I have two of them, the Sangen Dark Professional and the Aries Diver 1. In 2011, I was signed up to do the very first World's Toughest Mudder, the 24-hour adventure race.
Yeah.
And it was in New Jersey in the middle of December, where 20 out of the 40 obstacles were water obstacles.
Oof.
Yeah. I was getting my gear together and realized that this would be an excellent opportunity for different companies to R&D their stuff, is torture test it. The vast majority of companies politely declined and said, that sounds like fun, but we're good for the time being.
Thanks for no thanks.
Yep. The only one that stepped up to the plate was Triple Out Design,
Wow.
which was a San Francisco company. So I love that they're from the Bay Area.
And what's the story with the Aries?
Aries is also co-branded with Triple Out Design, and this was founded by a guy who was a police officer who then became an air marshal and then became a CIA operative, and then in retirement decided to follow his passion and become a watchmaker.
That's something else, isn't it?
Yeah. That's one of the things that I've been noticing, like a theme to my collection. I like pieces that have a good story behind them.
Sure.
And I really like functional quirkiness.
Yeah.
Yeah, like the ZRC.
Yes.
I think that's full of functional quirkiness, isn't it?
Oh, definitely.
And on the Erica strap too.
Yeah.
So good.
It has the crown at 6 o'clock, and if you unscrew the crown, then this little link will prevent you from putting the watch on your wrist. So that way you're not diving with an unscrewed crown. And then another little bit of quirkiness that it has is this slot in the bezel. They call it their Easy Clean system, so that you can wash salt and sand out of there to keep the bezel from sticking afterwards.
So that's just you can rinse water directly into that? Yeah, very cool.
Yeah.
I knew about the rotating link to stop from, but I didn't realize it had the rinsing system. That's good, because that's an actual issue. If you dive pretty frequently in salt water, the bezels just bind right up.
Yep.
And then you go to time your pizza or whatever, and it's not gonna go correctly.
I had been looking at ZRC for a while because they were traditionally, of course, issued to the MN, the French Marine Nationale, but they were also issued to French firefighters. So I like that little bit of history to go with it.
Didn't know that, yeah. Can watches be worn over a fire suit?
I'd wear it underneath.
Yeah,
because
okay.
Chances are the strap would melt.
Yeah.
Because our gear is rated for about 400 degrees. It feels like maybe about 150 or so inside for us.
Feels like 150. Damn. I don't know what I would take. 50 degrees in this water again, or 150 in this fire suit?
You've got some aqua dive and some doxa. That's right in the zone for quirky, cool tool stuff.
Definitely.
Why don't you walk us through the pair of aqua dives?
All right, so there's actually 3 aqua
We got
dives.
3, a trio.
It's at
Yeah.
the triple entente.
Oh, look at this.
This was the first aqua dive that I picked up. At the time, it was my biggest watch until I got this one. And just found out that this case was actually based off of this watch.
You can see that visual kinship.
I also love co-branded watches because I feel it just further delves into that tool watch aesthetic. Really gives a sense that the watch was meant to go out and be used for some type of activity or adventure. So this one's co-branded with Poseidon, and it's a GMT.
Such a good logo too.
Yeah.
It just suits the watch so nicely, and it suits to the the kind of background of, like you said, like dive watch collaborations like we see with the Aqualon.
Yeah.
These are killer, and I love the yellow as well.
Yeah, it's such a great, fun summer watch, and it was my first GMT watch, so it's fun to travel with it too.
One of the watches I noticed right away on the table was this, and it kind of smells a little like smoke, actually.
Yep,
So which is kind of crazy. Why is that?
that is my William Wood, founded by Johnny Garrett, and his grandfather was a firefighter. And so there's a lot of nice little nods to firefighting within that watch. The strap is made out of decommissioned fire hose. And that's why sometimes it'll smell a little smoky.
Yeah. So this was once, involved in fighting fires. Incredible. Very, very cool.
Yeah.
So when we opened the conversation, you said you were actively anti-watch, but now it's clear you've gone deep down the rabbit hole.
Yes.
Farther than even someone with a passing interest in watches. Like, this is a real collection with deep meaning. So what has watch collecting done for you on a personal level?
Well, I always tell people that I came for the watches and I stayed for the stories. And also it's been my creative outlet lately, just between watch photography And then also knowing that these are historical tools, it inspires me to get out and do more stuff.
Yeah, this is an amazing experience. So thank you, Watches, for bringing us together, and thank you, Asha, for taking us out here.
Yeah, sharing a little bit of the California watch culture with us.
Yeah, thank you guys so much for making the trip out. Appreciate it.
After diving into Asha's amazing collection, we hit the road north to Berkeley to connect with somebody who's no stranger to the HODINKEE world, our friend and former Talking Watches guest, Eric Koo. Eric Koo gets to put his hands on some of the rarest and coolest vintage watches in the world, so he knows a thing or two about the best of the best, and his perspective as both an American collector and dealer provides insight on both the history and the current state of American watch collecting. Sadly, though our interview with Eric was great, during a stop along the coast, some enterprising criminals smashed up our truck and stole a bunch of our camera gear, including most of the footage from our chat with Eric. But the show must go on, and our crew, along with Eric, persevered to meet up again so he could give us some insight into his incredible collection and how it reflects on American taste for watches.
Welcome back to California. It's been a minute. I heard you guys got the Bay Area welcome last time you were here.
Eric's remarkable collection shows a deep connection to both American culture and to his own personal perspective, one that deepens my own appreciation for the wide world of watches.
The first watch I'm going to talk to you guys about is the infamous $5.99 deep sea alarm from Goodwill. A gentleman discovered this watch at a Goodwill store in Phoenix, Arizona, and he posted about it in a Facebook watch group, and I contacted the person who bought it, Mr. Norris. A deal was quickly made, and 2 days later he flew out to the Bay Area to deliver the watch to me.
Less than 1,000 deep-sea alarms were made for the American market, signed only with the name Le Coultre on the dial. They were among the first watches made with alarms for use by divers, making these one of the most desirable vintage pieces ever made by Jaeger Le Coultre.
I've kept with me here, just as important as the watch and more important than original box and papers, in my opinion, are the original price tag of $5.99. And I have the original sales invoice as well, which will help refresh my memory as to when this purchase was made. And it was actually purchased at the Goodwill of Central Arizona store on West Thunderbird Road in Phoenix on January 17th, 2015. And it was $5.99 and there was no sales tax charged on the item.
To a collector like Eric, it was worth an offer of over $35,000. Zach accepted with the stipulation that, as part of the deal, he would get his dream watch, an Omega Speedmaster Professional. Eric agreed, and the rest is history.
So you know watch collectors always love giving nicknames to everything. The next watch that I'm sharing with you guys is an actual original Thunderbird. You can see in Rolex advertising of the time that they talked about it being designed for the Thunderbirds, and the watch bears a Thunderbird logo on the dial.
In the 1950s, the U.S. Aerobatic Squadron, known as the Thunderbirds, asked Rolex for support by way of reliable watches. What they received was the Turnograph, a date just with a rotating bezel and a stamp on the dial that not only recognized the service of the Thunderbirds, but also earned these rare watches one of the coolest nicknames in the game.
Rolex, in the old days, had basically co-branded a lot of dials with jewelers such as Tiffany. But another thing they did is they always had like a corporate program or some sort of private label program where they were able to sell watches to organizations and put their logos on the dial. You know, that really represents to me like a very kitschy part of American history. And you know, the Thunderbird logo in particular really has that distinctive 1950s, 1960s kind of line drawing look. It looks really interesting on a Rolex dial. This is a very interesting, peculiar Rolex, and this model is called the Transcontinental. This is a watch that most people don't even know exists. There have been maybe 3 or 4 examples that have surfaced. It's a date just with the word Transcontinental on the dial, and then a turning bezel with a graduation of 12 units, which I guess are hours. It's a watch that there's just not very much information about out there. If you search on the internet, you know, people kept thinking that the word Transcontinental was like a brand. like a transcontinental airline or an airway or something. But, you know, kind of thinking about this for a while, I came to the conclusion that this was the model name that Rolex had designated for this watch because it bears a unique reference. I just couldn't find any trademark filings for the word transcontinental that used a word mark that was similar to this. So I feel pretty confident that it was a model name that Rolex had come up with that somehow has gotten lost over time. Everybody wants a watch that's like theirs, so to speak. This really is my watch. Ricepi, who has become a really dear friend of mine, he's the person behind the brand Acrivia. And I was lucky enough to be able to get a CC01 in rose gold from them. And then I wanted to buy this other model, which has a similar movement called the AK06. He makes a steel one and a titanium one. And I was like, hey, Richep, is it possible you can take this one and put it in the steel case? He's like, you know, I don't do that, but okay, no problem, I'll do it. I had this idea of having a dial that was done in a blue color, and I ran that by him and he says, okay, let me think what we can do. And then this was the product of that. This is one of my favorite watches that I own. It represents the friendship that I have with the maker, and also it's just really a great looking watch. I think ultimately watches are fashion accessories, right? And you know, most people wear their watches, and it comes down to like what is fashionable, what people like. And a lot of the early American watches, like the Hamiltons, you know, early Bulivas even, something like that, aesthetically they've kind of fallen out of favor. I'm not sure that these will have a renaissance until that style is found to be, you know, interesting again.
Sometimes our connection to watches is defined by an era of watchmaking. And that's exactly what we find in Corte Madera with the wonderful collection of René Rondeau. René is the foremost expert on Hamilton electric watches, which represent a revolutionary technological leap in American watchmaking. He was there from the beginning and spent a lot of time in the factory in Lancaster. He showed us his workshop, reassembled a Hamilton electric watch, and shared his insight on the impact that Hamilton had for all of American watchmaking.
There's definitely a dialogue between the times and the watches, the products, especially when we're talking about the Hamilton electrics. We're talking about the 1950s. It was the atomic era, and people were excited about science and technology. Transistors were new, transistor radios were a big deal. And for a watch to come out that was powered by a battery instead of a mainspring, it was mind-blowing. It was absolutely incredible. And to have them cased in these designs that were quintessential mid-century modern, it's brilliant. It's absolutely brilliant.
The Hamilton Electric made a big statement when it debuted in the late 50s, and as innovative as it was, the watches were also quite difficult to repair. The parts inside required an extreme level of care and precision, something René knows well after decades of repairing these movements.
This is where I spent every day of my life working 8-10 hours a day for over 25 years. I still dabble every once in a while, but kind of losing my mojo. How many Hamilton Electrics have I worked on? Well, actually, it's fairly simple because I have logbooks of all my repair work. Anyway, it's about 13,000. So yeah, I've done a few. A lot of the time, the things I ran into were problems created by previous watchmakers who didn't know what they were doing. I don't really want to criticize the watchmakers because they were doing the best they could. They didn't really understand these movements. They didn't see them very often. So they would run into a problem and they would address it as if it were a mechanical watch, and they would end up botching it. If you have a mechanical watch and it's running much too fast, you can add weight to the balance to slow it down. If a watch is running fast on a Hamilton Electric, it's contact wear. While I sold the majority of my actual physical watch collection after retirement, I still have an awful lot of material that I accumulated over the years that I've essentially created a scrapbook for. This is a copy of the original memo that John Van Horn, who was the head of the research department in 1952, wrote to suggest looking into making electric watches. That started the research project. I have a couple of prototypes left from the Hamilton Electric series. This is a so-called Model 2. So this dates to 1953 and was one of 23 prototypes that were made for tests. And they quickly found that this one did not work very reliably at all. So it was just one of the intermediary steps in the evolution of the Hamilton Electric. This is another prototype that's encased in plexiglass. And this was a prototype 500 movement that came out of a watch that was used for wear tests. Some of these movements were encased in lucite that were donated to museums. This one is a Titan case with a Van Horn dial, but what makes this special to me is I skeletonized it. So I did, to the extent possible, cut the bridges out, filed, and opened up as much as I could of the movement so you can watch the Model 500 in operation.
Rene's watch collection includes an old pocket watch from his childhood in Springfield, Massachusetts, where he grew up, and another one that his grandfather won in a boxing match.
My favorite of all, Breguet Tradition. A little bit extravagant, but I consider it my retirement watch. And this is, I think, the most impeccable presentation of a skeleton concept. It's not skeletonized, it's not cut open, but having the entire gear train laid out so perfectly symmetrically on the pillar plate is just a masterpiece of craftsmanship. It's also a very faithful reinterpretation of a 1795 design by Breguet himself.
Rene also has a truly epic collection of phonographs, record players, jukeboxes, cameras, and more. An American cultural hub, all of his own collecting.
My fourth phonograph I ever bought in 1963, so I've had that for a long time. I bought this in 1963 as well. So those are old friends. These three on the bottom shelves are coin-operated machines and sort of proto jukeboxes from the turn of the century. Only one selection per machine, but it was common for places to have several machines lined up with a different selection in each one, and people would just go down the way and drop their pennies or nickels in to listen to the music. Oh yeah, yeah. And here's a multi-page history of the Hamilton Electric, as written in 1965 by Jim Reese, who was one of the three people who created the watch. And he's the guy that taught me how to work on Hamilton Electrics. The Hamilton Electric, a lot of people today look at it and say, oh, it was a failed watch, which it wasn't. I mean, it was in production for 13 years, and they sold a lot of them. There was an awful lot of very fine craftsmanship that went into making these. Hamilton pioneered asymmetric cases with the Hamilton Ventura, the first electric watch to come on the market in '57, and that fed pretty much all the other watchmaking companies, even in Europe, to come up with designs that were much more unusual and interesting and sometimes bizarre. I mean, think of the Cartier Crash. The Crash, yeah. It's those are all really inspired by what Hamilton did with the Hamilton Electric series. It's probably not the case that people give enough credit to Hamilton and other producers of the time, and I think it's simply that modern collectors are just not aware of the history. I mean, Hamilton today is a very respected brand. They make extremely good quality watches at very good prices, and they do hark back to their heritage. But by and large, the majority of people today just are not really aware of what the vintage Hamiltons really were.
The big takeaway here is that the American watch industry isn't dead. It lives on through the passion and enthusiasm of creators and collectors alike. Watch media thrives in America, and the volume of collectors, be it vintage, modern, or even custom, only grows from coast to coast. It's true that America was once a titan of the watch industry, and the United States paved the way for mass production of quality watches. Today, new independent watchmakers thrive by creating their own unique place in the watch market, and it's one that isn't solely reliant on Swiss manufacturing. The road through America has shown us that watch enthusiasm here is just as diverse and cultured as anywhere else in the world. It's a huge country full of differing perspectives, regional tastes, and high levels of specificity. But one thing is for sure, from Los Angeles to New York City, the United States are wild about watches.